Hello and welcome to the Spittin the Truth podcast. I'm the Sports Guru 716 and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This week we're going to cover the Dennis Wideman situation that occurred on Wednesday night between Calgary and Nashville and the linesmen, which of course is very interesting. And if you haven't seen my previous video from this week up on my channel, please go check it out either during, after, or right now during this video. So yeah. Well, I'm with Dylan. This is our second take. I just want to say that. This is our second take. And, yeah, so Dylan, you want to say a few words?
As Andy said, my name is Dylan. I've done a number of podcasts with Andy before, but from the looks of it, you would never be able to tell. And if you watched last week, you might remember me if you've seen any of our previous shows, or thank you for watching. And if you're watching today, thank you. I'm looking forward to today's episode.
Yeah, by the way, if you are the same Canadians that watched the whole episode last week, you should probably subscribe, because I don't know why you put up with Keith for 45 minutes and still watched the whole thing, and then one of you watched it a second time. So, that's some real dedication to some randoms, and I give you props for that. By the way, Keith is not on the show, if you cannot tell. This is a mutual decision. We're going in a different direction. We are going to still be on the search for a third host because we think the show flows better with a third host, but Keith is not the answer to our problems. So, with that, we are going to start talking about the Dennis Wideman situation. So, Dylan, what are your thoughts on the Dennis Wideman situation?
I think it's certainly an interesting situation right now in the NHL, because we don't know for sure whether it was a deliberate action or the result of possibly being concussed from the hit that happened almost immediately before. And it's hard to say either way, because you never really know, and the only person who will know is Dennis Wideman, and if he was concussed, maybe he doesn't even know. But he's never had the reputation of being a player who would do that intentionally. So that's what leads me, and I don't know, maybe some other people, to believe that it's something momentary. It was an accident. It was something that he didn't really plan for. Maybe the hit, he wasn't really paying attention on his way to the bench, might have been a little dazed, some fuzzy vision, whatever, just might have seen the white in the jersey and a Predators player coming up the boards, and at the last second noticed the ref, reacted as though he was a player, or reacted as though, I don't know, he'd been trained to in his career. But I don't think he noticed and consciously thought, I'm going to hit this ref into the boards. And it raises a lot of questions as to whether it was or wasn't intentional. Either way, there's a lot left to be answered about what did happen prior, what happened at the time, what happened after, because obviously he stayed in the game, there was no penalty, and what is still going to happen.
Yeah, it's quite a situation. It's really definitely, like you said, interesting and pretty much one of a kind. There is a hearing Tuesday. The NHL has suspended him indefinitely, and he has a hearing Tuesday. Now, they don't play any games between now and Tuesday, so really he's not missing any game time. Now, the way I look at this, I have my opinions, but to play devil's advocate, if he plays in the next game, I'm going to have a hard time believing that he didn't see the referee. Now, the only reason I'd say that is because concussion protocol currently in the NHL says you have to be symptom-free for a week, in which case he wouldn't be able to play in their next game, because it would have been, I believe, 6 nights later. I think it would be 1 exact week away, and I don't think he would qualify. I don't think you can play on the 7th day. I imagine you have to play on the 8th day, because the 7th day is the 7th day symptom-free. Now, the way I look at it this way is that, I think he was concussed. If you watch the replay is not only on my video's description, but it may even end up in this podcast's description. He gets hit by Miko Salamaki, I believe, or something like that. That's close to his name. And he gets hit, and he kind of knocks his head off the boards. And when he does this, you can see him grab for his head. He claims that his neck and shoulder hurt, which does not help him. I think he needs to realize something. If he's concussed and he's trying to avoid an injury or being out or something like that, he needs to admit that he has one, because it's hurting his case by saying, I don't have one, to be quite honest. Even if he didn't have one, I would say I did have one. But he he grabs for his head, and he gets, skating pretty slow, and the ref's right in front of him, he doesn't see him. Now, like Dylan said, blurry vision, dizziness, loss of coordination. These are all symptoms of concussions, and we may talk about concussions more in depth later because I went on quite the rant on Thursday. But to be honest, like this guy he's not a menace on the ice. He did have an incident earlier this year that actually, ironically enough, I was not happy about, where he mugged Ryan Kessler after the whistle after the end of the game. But Dennis Wideman is not a menace. And like he said, he has the utmost respect for the officials. He's never had an issue with officials before, and I don't see why he would, board a linesman. Why would somebody board a linesman? There's no reason to board a linesman. I could maybe even stretch it and see why you'd board a referee. I could see why you may do that, although it's a very stupid thing to do. I could see a player doing that. I could see why they would do that. But a linesman's going to call you off sides and you're going to board him? Like, that's ridiculous. So, I don't know. That's pretty silly. By the way, Dylan is the resident doctor on this podcast, so whatever he says about these concussions or things like that is law. So just remember that as we go throughout this. By the way, comment below with any thoughts or opinions whether you think Dennis Wideman is a menace. Maybe you're a hater. Maybe you're an Edmonton Oilers fan. Maybe. Who knows? But yeah, comment below with your thoughts and things like that as we go throughout this process here. So, Dylan, what do you think the NHL is going to do about this?
For me, it's tough to consider at the moment, but I think they're going to have to look at obviously he's having the hearing on Tuesday, and they're going to have to look at the range of possibilities. And I can't imagine that they don't have him meet with a doctor at some point. If he hasn't already, I think the All-Star weekend actually works to his benefit, to where he'll have this time off, to where he's not actually missing games, to recover and maybe put together the events of that evening well enough in order to present them on Tuesday. And I believe it's a minimum 20-game suspension if deemed intentional that he hit the referee. And so obviously that's something you would want to avoid, because if he doesn't have a concussion, even if they make him go through the protocol, that's probably less than 20 games if he's feeling fine right now. And if he's not feeling fine, then he should be not playing regardless. So my gut's telling me that, honestly, I think he'll miss a couple games. I don't think they'll give him 20. I don't think they'll find enough to say it was intentional. And they might put, just as a precaution, because concussion is one of the injuries you can never be too careful when it comes to the head. And disclaimer, I'm not actually a doctor, but relative to my friends, they consider me qualified enough. So a head injury, neck injury, those aren't things you want to mess around with. You want to be extra careful, because if you rush back or don't take it seriously, then it's something that can seriously affect you even worse. We've seen to much farther extents down the road.
Yeah, concussions are not something to mess with. They are the most serious injury that anybody can have in their career. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think a lot of people underestimate the repercussions of a concussion. And yeah, I think it's more devastating than a knee injury. You don't mess with the head. You do not mess with the brain. The brain is very fragile, and it's not something you should be bashing around and having bruises all over it and things like that. So, like you have a situation here where the NHL is it's tough because it is 20 games, and that's a huge suspension. They just suspended Sean Horkoff 20 games for, taking PEDs when he probably, needed a lot stronger PEDs if he was going to take any, to be honest with you. But, you take Wideman, you give him 20 games for boarding a ref. Honestly, if they found out he did it on purpose, I think he should get more than 20 because that would have deemed worse, in my opinion, than like a regular hitting the ref situation, even though we really haven't had too many to actually reference to be like, oh, this happened in the past. No, you really don't have anything to reference. This is new ground for everybody. And, if he has a concussion, hopefully they had a doctor look at him after the game for a concussion. But I don't think they did. They let him back in the game, which tells me, I don't think they just never took him out. Which I think the Flames are doing a injustice to not just Dennis Wideman, but their whole team by doing this. Because if they had taken him out, just on the, whim that he could have had a concussion, they could have just taken him out. He misses next Wednesday, and the NHL probably can't suspend him at all. He would just miss one hockey game. He'd be like, oh, yeah, I had a concussion. They took me out, and then I didn't have symptoms up till next Thursday. So he could have done that. They could have, if I was the Flames, that would have been a smart thing to do at the time because you just saw your player run over the referee. Like, you know what that means. So it's unfortunate. I just think the NHL can't do much about it. I think he's not going to even get suspended. I think he'll miss a couple games, like Dylan said, until he is proven deemed healthy. So, it's a thing. And, I just hope that his health is at the utmost concern of everybody involved, in which case I think that he won't be suspended, but he'll be out for a little time. If it's proven that he has a concussion, do you think Calgary is at fault for, letting him go back in that game after that hit?
I think to a certain extent, you'd have to say definitely yes. I mean, with the severity of concussions, we see it across all sports. Like, that the leagues are trying to crack down on concussions, stricter protocol, etc. And if it's found out that he has a concussion and they let him play the rest of that game after an incident like that, I do think that I don't know if there will be any specific repercussions for the Flames, but it can't look good, and I don't think it can help them in any way. But I know in your last video you alluded to possible discipline to the trainers or whatever who let him play. But I can't imagine that after an incident like that and he gets on the bench, somebody, a coach, trainer, doctor, teammate, somebody had to go up to him and be like, are you okay? Something. And I imagine that it wouldn't just be one person. And if Wideman did say, yeah, I'm fine, I can't imagine they just brush it off or whatever. So, I mean, I know he wasn't taken out. He didn't go through the protocol, maybe not right away. I don't know if they've done any looking into it since the game. But I can't imagine that the entire team and the coaches and doctors just watched it happen, let him take his seat on the bench, and proceed as normal.
I see. This is what the problem is, and this is where I have my problem with the NHL, and I think this is where it changes from not a Dennis Wideman situation, but Dennis Wideman being the beginning of something. Because you have a situation here where a player is, of course, going to tell you they're fine. He's not going to tell you he isn't. There are not many players in professional sports in general to say, hey, I am injured, I have a concussion, because they know what a concussion means to their team and to their careers. You get labeled. Once you get a concussion, there's like, okay, they've got one strike. That player has one strike. You only have so many, you know? And there may be a policy, and I didn't even include this in my video, I would consider a 3-strike policy with concussions, where you may actually have to, for the betterment of that person, as much as they wouldn't want it to happen, for the betterment of that person, you may have to tell them after 3 concussions they're done. And that's a tough pill to swallow, but, you know, with a thing like this, there should have been somebody to tell Calgary, or Calgary themselves, their training staff, to see that hit, see how he reacted afterwards, and be like, hey, he may say he's fine, but that is a concussion. That is not a situation that, oh, he's injured. A concussion is an injury, but at the same time, it's not your prototypical, oh, I hurt my shoulder. It's a head injury. You can't let him say he's fine when, he just got hit like that and he reacted the way he did, especially after the way he reacted. Somebody with a bum shoulder does not check a referee. Somebody with a sore neck or a strained neck does not run over a referee. That's somebody that doesn't see the referee. And it's upsetting to think that there are some people out there that do think that he wasn't concussed, which it's a possibility, and it could come out Tuesday, he did it on purpose, and I could see that happening. But at the same time, there are some people out there that think he should, even if he was concussed, be able to see the situation, and that is the farthest thing from the truth I've ever heard. I am no doctor, and I joke that Dylan's a doctor, but at the same time, I know the symptoms of a concussion, and that would dictate a situation like this being deemed not necessarily allowed, because this is not allowed, this is not okay, but it's not his fault, and he shouldn't be held accountable for the actions that occurred following his concussion. Now, Calgary the NHL needs to change what they're doing. And I told Dylan that this may turn into a concussion debate, and it is. Well, not necessarily a debate, but what are you going to do? And Dylan, what do you think the NHL can do or will do in reaction to this incident in terms of concussions across the board?
I think it's this incident. I think you already mentioned earlier how it's kind of isolated in that we haven't seen something like this before. And it's like the situation specifically of him hitting a referee and whatnot. And it's not something I don't think anybody really expected to see. Like, you think of all the scenarios, like players getting in fights, can't remove their helmets. You talked about a player losing his helmet and getting hit in the head with the puck. Like, those hypothetical scenarios, nobody ever considers, like, oh, he got checked and then he went and retaliated to the linesman. Like, nobody makes that part up. So you have to consider, I don't know, I'm sure they're doing research on the equipment, and it's ability to protect from more concussions, and they're continuing doing research on the protocol. And I can't imagine that throughout the remainder of the NHL's existence forever, I can't imagine that they'll ever get less strict on concussion protocol. So it's just something to keep an eye on. I think the league and the Department of Player Safety and everything, with some situations, you have to learn from the game in a way, to where it's like they weren't prepared for this because nobody saw it coming, but now that it's happened, and this isn't the way that you generally want to treat situations and injuries, but it's like, this has happened. We have to make sure that it doesn't happen again, that we enact something in order to prevent it and prevent situations like this, and then use that maybe as a jumping off point. Like, what if he had a concussion? What if he retaliated towards either a ref or a player, and then that specific person themselves had a concussion? And it's a slippery slope that you have to look at what has happened, what you think could happen, what will happen, and try to do your best to alter the course of the game. I don't want to say alter the game, but make adequate changes in order to protect everybody involved, whether it be players, officials, coaches, the broadcasters that stand between the benches, anybody. The game has to be safe for people to play it, enjoy it. And I know some people say the fighting, like, oh, I love the fighting. That's the fun part, watching somebody beat up another guy, get the crowd, get the team riled up, change of energy, momentum, and everything. But at the same time, it's like, I know these people are getting paid a lot of money to do this, but there comes a point when you're risking too much by playing the game. And I think that's something that the game has to figure out how they can protect itself and its players while also maintaining what it is and what it stands for, in order to not lose the loyal fans who have grown up loving the game.
From a guy that likes fighting, and I mentioned this in my episode of my Spittin' Truth, I said, I think you have to deter fighting to a degree to eliminate the people that want to do staged fights. Because fighting is, I think fighting has a place in this game. And it's because the NHL is dragging their feet on how to protect their good players and their, smaller players. If the NHL could do a better job protecting their players, I probably would be less of a proponent of fighting staying in the game. And I think it's because of players like Tom Wilson, Zach Ronaldo, Brad Marchand. You could go down a list of players and be like, those are the reasons I believe fighting needs to stay in the game. And it's not because I do wish that they could just be punching them out, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it's because the NHL doesn't do anything about it. They're like, here, Brad Marchand, here's a couple game suspension. You give a couple game suspension here, a couple game suspension there. This player is injured. Oh, they're injured. Okay, instead of 1 game, it'll be 3 games. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That player could be out months, and that person that did it, like, oh, I didn't mean to do it, got 3 games. They're out a week. They lost how much money compared to that player who just lost that many games? That's ridiculous. Like the league itself is not doing enough to protect its players. And this is a conversation not only about the players and players hurting each other, but players allowing themselves to get hurt and then hurting themselves more by not addressing their injuries. And I don't know, like my next question was going to be to Dylan, like why? Like I know you said, will the NHL do something? I asked, will the NHL do something, and what do you think they should do? But if you are the NHL, what policy would you put in place? If there is one, if you like the current system, you can like the current system. But if you were the NHL, you were the Department of Player Safety, what would you do tomorrow? Or I mean, not well. It's All-Star Weekend. What would you try to implement for next season or whatever to try and help with these concussions or and things like that?
You have to consider a wide variety of possibilities, and it can range from like I'm on the fence. I'm not strongly like fighting's part of hockey. It has to be there, but at the same time, eliminating it's kind of a stretch because when you're watching it on TV, when you're at the game, and two players drop the gloves, sometimes it gets the blood flow and the adrenaline pumping. Everyone gets louder in the arena, and it adds some excitement, but at the same time, it's like I don't want to sound like a broken record, but hits to the head are serious. And I know you can talk about other sports like, oh, we watch boxing, which is repeated blows to the head. And it's like, so it's not that severe, but we see it enough to where between fights, getting checked into the boards, just maybe taking a puck to the head, getting knocked down and hitting your head on the ice, hitting another player. There's so many ways you can get hurt to where I don't think enacting any rules specifically on fighting. I don't know the statistics of what brings about most concussions in the NHL, but I don't think you have to look at the grand scheme of everything that can cause concussions, how you can limit that, how you can wean it out, whether it's an integral part of the game, whether it would be worthy of greater punishment or specifics like that. And you have to take it by case. Like fighting, you could do stricter penalties. You talked about in your last episode, after a fight, both players go through concussion protocol, and that may end up being more than 5 minutes. And that's like something that could play, like it might weigh on a player's mind more. Like if it's a John Scott, he might fight, not worry about it, because it's not like he's going to score the game-winning goal. Not that he can't. He's an all-star. But if it's somebody like, I can't even think of a good example right now, but somebody who's maybe a captain, because you may know that Andy says that to be a captain in the NHL, you must be at least willing to drop the gloves. Say you're a team captain and you want to drop the gloves, but say the game's tied or you're down with only a couple minutes left, the team might need you for those last couple minutes more than they need you to beat this guy up. So it's something that may like, hold on a second, maybe I should, for the betterment of my team, hold back a bit. And I know it's hard when you're running on emotion and adrenaline and you've been playing for however many minutes into the game that sometimes it's hard to hold back. But if you have when you think about it in the grand scheme, greater penalties, etc., and you think about it as more than just individual, like not only will I lose games, my team's going to lose me for minutes, games, whatever. It might change the mentality of the sport to sort of limit these dangerous situations that we see so commonly.
And it's funny that you mentioned that captain thing because it's true. Um, I believe a captain should be willing to fight. Now, you see, I'm not going to take anything away from that captain when they choose not to fight because the game's tied or they're down one. It's the fact that, you know that they're willing to do it if the time came that they would do it and they're not going to back down from it. And, I like the idea, like I said, like Dylan said, about, going through concussion protocol because it's not a penalty anymore. Like, it's a penalty. Don't get me wrong, it's a penalty. So I guess I said that they don't get 5 minutes of PIMS, but then again, on that extremely weird chance that they were out of protocol in less than 5 minutes, I guess they could still get a penalty. But like concussion protocol at best could be 15 minutes out. Think about it that way. A player could be in a fight and have concussion-like symptoms, get a concussion in that fight, and they're not going to tell anybody they have a concussion today that in a fight. They're just going to go right to the penalty box. They go right through concussion protocol. They're out for 7 days with a concussion. And that all of a sudden, that deters people from fighting. Now, I like fighting, and like I've said, I think there's a necessary part to it. But I think by deterring people from it, you end up with less fights and fights that usually mean more. Not, a fight may actually have a lot of meaning. Like, it'll be like, oh God, I'm really like trying to get my team going. I'm willing to risk myself being out for a week. Could be at most or could be at minimum if you do have a concussion. But yeah, like the NHL needs to, I don't know, like, I guess, would you put that in place? Would you do that, or would you do something else? Because like you're telling me like options, the way the NHL should look at it, but like in the ways you're going to look at it. But what, based on what your opinion is, what would you do? Like what would you put in stone, or like what procedure would you put in place yourself, if at all?
I actually am a fan of this presented idea of immediate concussion protocol, but I'm not a doctor. I don't know exactly what the concussion protocol consists of. So they take you to the locker room, they do whatever tests. It might not be a condensed process, and if they had to condense it down enough to where the player would have an opportunity to get back out into the game, then there's a chance that you leave out something important from the tests. But if it's something like we can do this specific test, which is a good indicator, within 10 to 15 minutes, then I think it's definitely worthy of looking at and maybe implementing, trying out, because as we said, players, it's still a penalty, but it's of greater length. You may reconsider. And if you get into a fight and then take the concussion protocol and they say you can't go back in, all of a sudden you're out for who knows how long. And in most cases, it's like, okay, I'll sit in the penalty box for 5 minutes and then go back to the bench, come out, antagonize some more if you're an enforcer, and life goes on. But if you absolutely have to go see a doctor after it, then it might sort of hold you back. And I don't know if hold you back is the proper term, but it will limit your opportunity of playing with an injury and furthering that injury, because with whether it's a head injury or not, one of the worst things you can do with an injury is to keep playing on it and aggravate it more, and then it's longer recovery, worse effects, maybe even with the longer recovery, a higher percent chance that it'll never get back to where it was. If you have a partially torn ACL or something and you tear it all the way, then that's a longer road to recovery than just a partial. Or if you have a concussion and then you get hit in the head again, that could be long-term brain damage. We've seen a lot about the CTE. There's a new movie on it. I haven't seen it. Movie critic Andy says it's not that great. And I know he talked about it in his last episode, but it's like that type of degenerative disorder might not show symptoms for even a couple of decades after the primary incidence of when it was brought about. And we've seen with a number of retired players, players who've been retired for a long time, players who've been retired for a short time, and what's come of them having experienced this disorder. And it's not something you can diagnose prior to you can suspect with symptoms of it that it may be true, but at this moment, I don't think there's a way to actually diagnose it until after a person's death and when you do an autopsy and actually look at their brain.
It's true. Honestly, I like movie critic. I watch a lot of movies, and I remember watching the documentary about, I think it's Dr. Amalu. I remember watching the documentary. If you've never watched it, I forget what it's called, and that's really not, a good thing to be like, oh, there's this documentary, and it's kind of like Concussion, but I don't remember what it's called. And it's got like a name that I should remember, but it's about Dr. Malu and how he found CTE and how significant CTE is. And Will Smith, you didn't deserve an Oscar. Ha, 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 ha. But really though, that that's not something to play with. CTE is serious problem, and it pretty much it's like Alzheimer's times 10. And like the thing with the concussion protocol, now I don't know what theirs is currently in terms of what they do if a player gets a concussion and bring them back to the locker room. Like I said, that's what I'd want them to do, is bring them back to the locker room right after it. But also, like I said, I think the NFL has it right. They did let Case Keenum, like I said, slip through the cracks, but I think they are farther ahead than the NHL is on this. And their procedures are better adequated for the current day and age. And I think that whatever concussion protocol they have, they're able to get players back on the field. Players end up back on the field after they go through protocol all the time. You see them out there like 10, 15 minutes later, So I think that's where they have to look. I think they have to take a page out of the NFL's book, be like, what's your protocol? What are your neurologists doing back there? Your team physicians, your trainers, to test for concussions. They test on the sidelines right there. They're able to do it real fast, So I think that that's the sort of thing they have to go through, is what the NFL does in terms of protocol, if they want to ensure that players get back on the field. Because what was that stat you posted today? There's 271 concussions this year in the NFL, or something like that. Now that's better, I think.
271 up from 206 last year.
Now, does that article, I wonder if they had people up in the press boxes last year when they were trying to figure this stuff out or not. But I think that I also said that they should consider putting a neurologist up in the press box and watch the ice and be like, hey, I'm going to watch the ice. That's your job. Watch the ice. If you see somebody get hit that looks like they may have a concussion, you call down and they're off the ice and they're getting checked out. and this is probably against the hockey gods. This is against the loyal fans that think this is the toughest sport, and it is. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's if not the toughest, it's one of the toughest sports in the league. I'm in the league in the world. Some of the most physically demanding sports, are hockey, football, things like that, and those are the sports you have to watch the closest. And if the NFL can do a better job than you doing concussion protocol when there are 22 players on a football field, and like I've said before, like 15 of them are on top of each other, then you sure as heck should be able to handle 12. So they need to really consider what their protocols are, and I think they should go to the NFL's system of concussions in terms of in-game testing and things along those lines. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's a direction to take, or do you think that the NFL may not really be much better than the NHL?
Well, you mentioned the data that has been reported on the NFL 2015 injury data, and there's a company, Quintiles Injury Surveillance and Analytics, who released this and reported it. And like we see that there's been total between practice, games, preseason, regular season, 65 more concussions between last season and this season. So you think they're cracking down on it more, but there's still 65 concussions over a season, a lot of concussions. But there's a part of me that's wondering if maybe these stricter rules are there's 65 more reported concussions as they're keeping a closer eye on it, so they're catching it more, and players aren't just like brushing it off and keep going. But part of it, when you're just looking at the numbers, you have to be open to the idea that maybe this season was just a lot of concussions, and the number of concussions that happened during practices actually dropped by 13. So when you look at it, it was probably about, I think it was, 78 concussions more in game between preseason and regular season this year. And I don't see a concussion in practice as something that happens often. So when you ignore that and there's 70 more concussions during the season, it's hard to consider, because me saying that there's just more reported is just a theory. So I think when you look at the data, you have to assume, okay, concussions are up this much. They're taking steps to sort of alleviate this problem, because the previous 3 years it's gone down. But I don't know. I think it varies, because it's also that the sports are so different. And like, I know you want to, it's, in a sense, it's the same injury, concussion, generalize it, but how it can happen in a variety of ways. And I think both sports, should be doing whatever they can in terms of research and action during the season to figure out, like, what's our best course. And learning from each other is certainly something that could work out well for both. Like, if the NFL was like, okay, we found this out and it's working for us, that's not to say that it wouldn't work for the NHL. It certainly could, and that would help a great number of players at all levels, across sports, sort of avoid this situation. And I certainly think that it would make sense, for me at least, whether what they're doing now is the answer or figuring it out. But if you take the different pro sports that have high incidences of concussions and work together, I think that could help sort of find, I don't want to say a solution, because concussions unfortunately will never be completely gone from these games, in my mind. But when you work together, I don't know, two brains representing the two leagues, obviously there's a much larger number of people, but two brains are better than one. So you put together what research you found, look for any similarities, and maybe that's the way that you, I don't want to say solve, but the way you figure this out.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. Two brains are better than one. I think that combining their efforts will only help them more in finding how to handle concussions better. Um, I think equipment needs to be looked at as well. I think they do some research on equipment. You see um, NFL, taking the helmet thing a little bit more seriously. They've got new helmets, the Revo Speeds. Not everybody has one though, which is a problem. With a $1 billion industry, you'd think you'd be able to afford to allow every player to have the best quality helmet. I think that is not only a injustice to the players, but that's just utter embarrassment. You can't afford to make sure that every player, your bread and butter, the thing that makes you your money, you can't invest in it to make sure that the product is healthy. They are your product. I don't want to reference people as objects, but you should be ensuring that their equipment is. This is not supposed to be about the NFL, but this is also related to the NHL. Because at least in the NFL, if your helmet comes off, you have to leave the field for a play. And I think, personally, that if you're in the NHL, and I mentioned on my video, I think we're just kind of just going through pretty much my ideas, but in my video, I said maybe when the player's helmet falls off, they should get a penalty. You see how loosely some of these players have their helmets on. This isn't the 1970s anymore. You're supposed to wear a helmet. It's true, though. It's the truth. You should be wearing your helmet. There's no reason for your helmet to fall off. And not only that, in the NFL, when a player's helmet falls off, usually it's the end of a play. But I think most of the time when a player's helmet comes off, the play stops. I'm not sure about that, but I don't really think they, if a player's helmet falls off, they're going to let it go. Where in the NHL, you can skate around for 5 minutes without your helmet on. That's okay. And I think that's a serious risk. Think about it. Why did you have all the players have to wear the helmet in the first place? I know for years and years the NHL didn't force you to wear a helmet, but now they do, and there's a reason for that. So when somebody doesn't have it on, how can you justify allowing the play to continue? That is an unnecessary risk. That's a risk. There's a reason why you did that. Are you just going to ignore the rule that you put in place? I understand maybe punishing the player for their helmet coming off may be too far, but a lot of them have it on, half-assed and loosely, and I think that the equipment manager should be at fault for that too. I think you should have to have your helmet on at all times. I think that's something serious to it. They should do their research and be like, well, these guys should have better equipment. I don't know, that's just, I don't know. I've never, I don't know how loose you're supposed to have a hockey helmet on, but I feel like there's a reason why you're wearing a helmet, and it isn't so it could fall off your head. It really just, it's mind-boggling that they would think that this is okay. Dylan, do you think it's okay that they let players skate around with no helmet on?
It's irresponsible. I mean, I know things happen in game, like you can't control. Like a player loses a helmet, and I think I would be perfectly fine if they declared that grounds to call the play dead, blow a whistle, something, and then have them put it on, sure it's secure, whatever. And I mean, these are grown men. We shouldn't have to babysit them. And somebody if their helmet comes down, they just want to keep going or whatever. And I mentioned earlier, like when your adrenaline's pumping, it's part of the game. You might just want to carry on, but it's like at the same point, it's like we're not doing this to sort of impede with you in terms of the game, but we're doing this to help you out, because you could say, oh, what if he lost his helmet? What if he would have gotten on a breakaway and scored? Or he lost his helmet. What if he would have taken a shot to the head and been out the rest of the year? I mean, you can put any way that you can look at it two ways. And obviously, one goal versus a season missed, there's not much to consider there of which one you would rather see happen. I mean, or which one you would rather. I don't know what I'm saying here, but which you want to not happen, obviously. You don't want to see the player be out a year, so that obviously has a greater impact than him scoring one goal, scoring one touchdown, something. And it should be the league's responsibility, like equipment managers too, they should say, be like, this equipment, whatever, make sure everything fits well, is sort of, you want it to be comfortable on the player, but you also want it to do its intended purpose. And a helmet's not doing its intended purpose if it's sitting on the ice.
Yeah, it's like you say we're not supposed to baby them. They're grown men. But obviously we had to baby them by forcing them to put their helmets on. They didn't want it to happen. You know, they had to force them to put their helmets on. They had to make a rule. You have to put your helmet on. And like, you don't make a rule like that. It's just, you don't make a rule like that and then be like, it's okay if it falls off. It's not okay. It's not okay. It's just, what the NHL is doing currently today is not enough to battle the concussion problems. And, to circle all the way back, right now you have a situation where you have a player that could have a concussion. And the first thing you do, and whether or not you're just doing it and he doesn't have a game, and I think Dylan and I disagree kind of on this, but by using the word suspended indefinitely, that holds a totally different meaning than he's going through concussion protocol and we'll have a meeting on Tuesday about the incident. When you say suspension indefinitely, your first thing you're thinking is it's a player's fault. If you're suspending him indefinitely, first thing, and then say we're going to talk about it Tuesday, they are going with the thought that he did it on purpose. They aren't thinking that he may have a concussion. The first thing they're thinking is, oh, that guy may have done that on purpose. The first thing you should be doing is being like, we're going to wait and see what his test results are coming back on, Thursday after he sees a neurologist, or after Wednesday night's game when he sees a neurologist, and we're going to assess that and then determine whether he should be suspended and talk to him in a hearing on Tuesday. But to say he's suspended indefinitely, those are big words. Those are not words that are tossed around lightly. Those have meaning. Like, you shouldn't, like, you are siding with the thought that he didn't have a head injury, and that is the problem. A head injury is a lot more important.
I agree that
No, you're good.
The player's safety comes first, and you should be more concerned about the possible concussion, but either way you look at it, you're going to take some heat. He's suspended indefinitely pending the hearing. Why aren't we focusing on his concussion or his health? He's in concussion protocol. Why did he play the rest of that game? So either way you look at it, there's going to be questions. Everyone's throwing around the suspended indefinitely, but it is pending the hearing. So the league probably doesn't know exactly what went on, and pending the hearing, maybe he won't be suspended at all. Pending the hearing, maybe he'll get 20 plus games. We don't really know at this point in time, and for us as fans, we have to more or less take the wait and see approach. But the league has to. I'm sure they have their bigwigs there in charge of it, watching the video. Certain people are going to be talking to Dennis Wideman himself, trying to figure out at the root of what happened in order to proceed, because whatever route you go first, the suspension pending hearing or concussion protocol, you're making an assumption. And I know you've said we can't rule out that it was intentional, but there are people out there who probably believe it was intentional. And if you put them through concussion protocol, some of those people might be like, well, he played the rest of the game and he didn't get penalized. He might not be getting suspended. And so they might be be overly happy with that. But I think if they had to choose one route, I hope in the end that they all make the right decision and figure out whether we ever know what truly went on. I hope that the league and Dennis Wideman and anybody involved is able to figure out what actually happened here and educate themselves enough in order to make the proper decision for what's best for him and the league going forward in terms of this event specifically and possible events in the future that may be similar and draw comparisons.
And on that note, we're going to end this episode. Yeah, it's a sticky situation. If you stuck around this long, please give it a like, because you obviously like it, unless you're laughing at us the whole time, which I laugh at myself when I listen back to this, so I wouldn't be at all surprised. Give it a like if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see future episodes of some Spittin' the Truth podcast, or my little series that I do during the week. I do Fights of the Night, Cheap Shots, and my Spittin' the Truth little rants that I do. I just have to vent. So thanks for watching, and I hope you come around next week for our next episode. Bye.
Bye.